On this podcast episode, we discuss all the basics of sleep, which is hugely important, and we find out how to never wake up hot again, and why sleeping cooler can get you much more deep sleep than before. Welcome to Anti-Aging Hacks. On this podcast, I interview top experts in anti-aging and longevity, and we discuss the best natural and medical solutions to bring you practical advice you can apply right now to fight back against aging. We also discuss sneak peeks at some huge scientific advancements coming in the near future that will allow us to age backwards. I am your host, Faraz Khan. Thank you for spending some time with me today. My guest today, Tara Youngblood, is the founder and chief science officer of Kryo Inc., which is a sleep science company focused on the future of sleep-driven health. The team at Kryo has designed a full-body temperature regulation sleep system which allows you to sleep cool through the night and never wake up because you're hot. I use one of their devices which helps me to sleep cool at night. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Tara, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
What is your background before you got into fixing sleep?
I'm a physicist by training. And so most of my background at that point was looking into fusion engineering and changing energy dynamics. But I met my husband in college and we kind of went into this entrepreneurship path. So we started designing and developing products, and we've probably brought about 100 different products to market.
Wow. You brought 100 products to market?
Mm-hmm. Yep, either for consulting or through ourselves over the years. Yeah, we've been doing it almost 20 years now. That puts you in really elite company and a really bold position to be launching the product that we're going to talk about today. How did you get into this world of sleep, to be specific? So it's looked like a great market niche. So when Select Comfort was talking about sort of setting your pressure settings, Tempur-Pedic was talking about pressure. Around the same time, microclimate seats would come out in cars, so you could adjust two different sides of your car, the passenger and the driver, differently. And we thought, well, great, because Todd has always slept hot, my business partner and husband, and I tend to be cooler, and so we're constantly fighting over what temperature the bedroom should be in. So it looked like a great market niche and a way to evolve the market. We discovered really from our users coming back to us of people that had not slept through the night in years, were having amazing results. We started to have people that were chronic not sleepers, also biohackers that were really looking at their sleep, all experimenting with this product. And they started coming back saying there's really big changes in sleep cycle happening. So that's where really that researcher in me said, okay, there's some real fun science that has to be happening here. This is not just a comfort thing. And that's where I really started to dive into what's really working. What is causing this phenomenal switch for people?
Well, that's great. And you mentioned the biohacker circles. And if you hang around those circles for any length of time, you'll know that sleep is such an important component of everything that we do as humans and how we optimize ourselves. Let's talk about circadian rhythms, which is where I want to start. Sarah, will you tell us why circadian rhythms are important when we talk about sleep?
Circadian rhythm graph that I think a lot of people have probably seen or think about. Really, there's a pattern that our body temperature, our core body temperature follows. So, it starts to go up in the morning and we think about our body temperature being that consistent 98 degrees, but it actually fluctuates throughout the day. And then in the middle of the night is actually when it should be the coldest. And on average, that's about 2 degrees colder than it would be normally.
Mm-hmm. And at what time at night does it get to that temperature?
So that's where it's a little bit personalized. It depends a little bit on your age and gender and when you go to sleep. But if you think about that period of time between 2 and 4, that's where it's typically is going to happen.
Okay. And so let's talk sleep cycles just to round this out and set the context for the audience. What is REM sleep? What is deep sleep? And why are each of these important?
Yeah, so there's in general three buckets of types of sleep: that REM sleep, and then light sleep, which is kind of in the middle, and that deep sleep. So REM sleep has been typically attributed to sort of that emotional, that we do a lot of dreaming in there. We relive sort of emotional parts of our day. It can go back up to 2 weeks where we're going to be reliving those REM thoughts or emotions, and that allows our brain to file those according to whether that's a long-term save or whether we can get rid of it and it's just fluff. And then deep sleep has also sort of memory components, although it's more like if you picture that everything you do during the day gets collected in your hypothalamus and it sort of sits there in short-term memory until you sleep. And that's when you file it. And you'll file it according to whether it's an important memory or not. So it's kind of, if you don't get good deep sleep, you're not going to have time for your brain to do that filing. There's also a significant physical recovery part of that deep sleep. It's usually most associated with that feeling of I woke up refreshed and I'm able to have my day. I've recovered from the stress. It can be a good predictor during that time of whether or not you should work out the next morning or whether you should have an easier day, whether you're going to have a good cognitive day as far as adding memories to that next day. All of those are good indicators in that deep sleep section.
Great. I can definitely tell the days that I don't have great sleep because immediately the feedback's almost immediate. I have memory recall issues when I'm trying to talk about a place that we went to or a restaurant that we visited, not that often, but once in a while, or just once. It's just harder to recall it for some reason. Is that a commonality and other people experience that as well?
Yeah, so that goes back to, there's a lot of studies, especially on college students, of if I stay up all night and I don't get great sleep, but I've spent the time studying, which is the most worthwhile for them to do. And again, it proves that if you don't get great sleep, you're going to have significant losses in memory and cognitive recall. That's pretty consistent across the board on all ages. As you get older, it only gets more significant. So deep sleep diminishes as we age. By the time we're 80, we may not be getting any deep sleep. So as you can imagine, that cognitive recall that doesn't have a chance to get filed or taken care of really starts to be much harder. And that's where a lot of the studies on Alzheimer's are really pointing to sleep deprivation, and specifically deep sleep deprivation, really attributing to some of those long-term memory problems.
Okay, so, and I know this matters how old you are and your gender probably as well, but what is the ideal amount of deep and REM sleep that we should get every day?
So our bodies really want about 2 hours. One of the magical parts that we've discovered with our product is that we can sleep shorter and still get those 2 hours as long as we're using some of that temperature regulation. Temperature, especially colder temperatures, really help entice our body to have more deep sleeps, and that's really in that first part of the night before we hit that peak of that valley. That sleep is all predominantly deep sleep focused. So we have a lot of the Army applications where they can only get 6 hours sleep because they're dropping in or they're trying to hack through something and they only have 6 hours to sleep. They can still get 2 hours of deep sleep with cooling. But in a traditional 8 hours, it's that 20% number.
And, it's very interesting. I had a few people reach out to me, this year actually, and they're asking, how do I get more deep sleep? I can only sleep 6 or 7 hours max. I don't have the luxury of sleeping 8 or 9. And so I think what you just said is very important, is we can maximize our sleep. We can maximize the factors going into sleep to be able to get that 2 hours of deep sleep, even though you're sleeping only 6 hours or so per night.
Yeah, that's part of my passion about health metrics. Everything is sort of pushing us to have this willpower to overcome, to think differently, to eat differently, to meditate more. And it requires some interaction from us. but I really feel like sometimes that adds stress to the health equation. But temperature is a really simple way. It talks to our unconscious mind. It's one of those hacks. There's actually the neurons in your hypothalamus are activated and release melatonin based on temperature. That was documented by Clifford Sapir out of Harvard. He was the first person to really call it the sleep switch. And so it's got this magical spot in our biological makeup.
By the way, folks, I'm going to put up the show notes of this episode at antiaginghacks.net/sleep cool, so you can easily review all the details we're talking about here. Personally speaking, there were a few factors why I was not sleeping very well. In fact, I was waking up multiple times a night, and there were a few reasons. One of them was I would sleep a lot on my side, and after an hour or two of being on my side, I would wake up and try to go to the other side because I was putting too much pressure on one shoulder, for example. The other reason was that I was just waking up to pee because I just drank too much water at night or in the evening. And the third reason was I was getting either too hot or too cold. And definitely getting too hot was one of the factors why I would wake up in sweats sometimes. And so your device in particular has helped me fix that problem that I was having. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Before we get in, let's talk about the different brain frequencies and the phases of sleep you described above. So the light sleep, the REM sleep, deep sleep. How does their brain frequency change or respond in these different phases?
Yeah, so REM sleep is really interesting because the brain frequencies during that time actually look a lot like we're awake. So it's a very easy to be woken up from REM sleep. That tends to be the type of sleep we have closer to morning as our sleep cycles get a little bit less deep. Deep sleep, on the other hand, is your slow wave sleep is another way that it's been called or referred to, especially if you look at studies, they'll refer to it as slow wave sleep. So our brain activity and the frequency of it has slowed down during that time.
And you mentioned that we get the majority of our deep sleep early in the night, and towards the end of the night, it's mostly REM sleep and light sleep that we're getting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then what about sleep cycles? This talk of there's a 90-minute sleep cycle where we've cycled through all of these phases. Can you touch on that briefly as well?
That's a pretty traditional thought, and a lot of people, when you track it, that's the one conversation or question I get a lot. People are tracking it themselves through some device, say, well, I don't look at mine and see 90-minute cycles. I think it's a great ballpark range and something to think about. And for a lot of people, that's the way it works. If you're not seeing that precisely, everybody's sleep is a little bit individualized, and I definitely see that temperature actually skews that a little bit. So they may be shorter cycles, but they're focused on that deep sleep. So I may get 45 minutes to an hour instead, and that's a deep sleep heavy cycle. And then later in the night, when it's the REM cycles, those are closer to 90 minutes. So if people are seeing that it's not always 90, that's pretty normal too.
Oh, wow. Good to know. I didn't realize that. Now, as a society, we're getting worse and worse sleep across the board if you compare from 100 or 200 years ago. And I understand newborn mothers or mothers with newborns, very good reason for not getting enough sleep. But why is the rest of society also not getting good sleep anymore?
Well, I'm definitely skewed from the temperature perspective, but when you look at what we've done to our lives to make ourselves more comfortable, we exist in a environmentally static environment. So most people keep their temperature in their houses between 68 and 74 all year round. So there's not a lot of seasonal variation, which our bodies had gotten used to for triggering that sleep. So when you want to get triggered to sleep, you're looking for a temperature change. And that's I think also one of the reasons why Chili Pad helps. But I think that we've made ourselves also very stressed out. And when you're stressed, it is really hard to go to sleep. I think a lot of people with that difficulty or poor sleep latency, it has to do with letting go of that stress and setting up a routine where they can relax enough to really fall asleep.
That makes sense. There's a lot of people that have resorted to using sleep medications, and sleep supplement companies are on the rise. People are popping either melatonin pills or taking, lots of CBD oils or tryptophan or 5-HTP. What is your opinion on humans taking supplements to go to sleep?
So I will sort of share my bias as a physicist versus chemist. My bias is to interact with our body in ways that don't affect the chemistry that's already in there. So we have hormones, our body has its own way of managing sleep and our circadian rhythms and our cycles. And it's really hard when someone uses melatonin, which is a hormone that is released naturally to help you fall asleep. As soon as you start replacing hormones, as soon as you start sort of doing that in a long-term basis. Now, short term, you can use it to reset from jet lag or those sort of things. But as soon as you start taking supplements in a long term way, you really need to be conscious about what else you're taking with it, how it interacts with those things that you might be taking, what your diet is, what your age is, what those dosages are. And I don't think there's a lot of great information on how to do that well, or that people aren't journaling and tracking it. So that's more my hesitation with that.
Mm-hmm. So you and your husband, Todd, who I've met a couple of times over the last few months, run a company that manufacture devices that help people have the perfect temperature at night. Can you tell us a bit more about the devices and what they do?
Yeah, we have sort of two different versions. The Chili Pad is our legacy product. It's similar to the old-fashioned thermostat that would be in your house where you set a temperature and it stays there until you move the dial somewhere else. So it's still that mattress pad that goes on any bed. It's got water and tubes that run through it. So we picture it really as a similar to your engine needing a radiator to keep it cool. This goes underneath your body to manage that temperature throughout the night. The Uller product is sort of our next evolution. It's a little more like the Nest would be to your original thermostat, where there's programmable features. It allows you to be able to sort of set a bedtime temperature, have a middle of the night temperature, have a wake up temperature. Warming your body to wake up is a natural way to, again, hack those sleep cycles and say it's time to wake up without sort of that jolt of your physical sound alarm.
That's very interesting. I do have your Chili Pad device. And again, as I said, it's definitely helped me to stop waking up just because I was getting too hot in bed. And when I started using it, I think, I read some blog or some article and I turned it to 65 degrees in the first night. And I believe I woke up 3 times because I was too cold. I wasn't used to it. And so I had to go back up and take it down a little bit slowly, so to accustom my body to a lower temperature. But it wasn't something I could do overnight, and I worked my way up to it.
Yeah, there is definitely sort of that onboarding time. We get that question a lot. Well, what temperature should I set it at? And a lot of that really depends on who you are as a person. Even with the Chili Pad, I would set it on warm. I like to read a little bit before I go to bed as part of that sort of sleep habits. And I like it nice and warm. But then as I was about to go to bed, I would put it on cool and then have it cooler for the night. But I was never as cold as Todd. Todd can have it on the lowest setting and sleep on it all night. And that works for him. So there is a little bit of that personal preference and figuring out what works best for you.
And so what is your thought behind the new device, the Uller, that you can program multiple settings per night? What's the science behind that?
So it really goes back to that circadian rhythm. If you look at that graph, it's going to sort of be really warm as you're about to go to sleep. And then it drops steeply into that valley to that bottom that we talked about between 2 and 4, where that's your peak low, or your lowest moment, not peak low, your valley lowest moment. And that should be about 2 degrees colder than your core body temperature. So I look at the fall asleep temperature is one way to schedule that first bucket, like what time, if you like to climb into a bed that's room temperature or cooler or warmer, that's when you set that first bucket. The second part of the night, you're less sensitive to temperature, and so you can set it much cooler than you would think. So that second bucket allows allows you to be cooler. And then most people, when they're waking up too cold, it's in that second half of the night. So once you start coming out of that valley and your body starts to warm up, you're a little bit more sensitive in that REM and light sleep to temperature. And so that allows you to have a little bit warmer setting as you go into your morning.
Great. And I know there's been a lot of studies done on sleep temperature in particular. Tara, what's the ideal temperature that we should be sleeping at night?
So I think this is a little bit of a fallacy because when most people hear that temperature, they set their house thermostat to that temperature. And then in our current sleep environments, we have the memory foam or the really comfortable mattresses that we sleep on that are moving away from all natural materials to these, foams that absorb heat and then release them back to us. And we're underneath these nice down comforters or thick comforters. So we've basically created this little cave, and inside that cave, we're 98 degrees pumping out heat. So even if we set our room, we have to be careful to think about what materials we're placing around our body while we sleep. So even without a chili pad, when you set it, if you're getting too hot, you should really consider like a weighted blanket or maybe some other options that are going to allow that heat to escape a little better. Some of that might be happening. So I really feel like it's not the outside environment, but the inside environment. And when we measure that in our labs and in the studies we've been going through, you really want to be 86 degrees or less in that sleep cocoon.
So since you're a sleep expert, I'm going to ask you a couple of additional questions of things you just raised. One is a weighted blanket. And I've recently got a weighted blanket, but it's because I'm trying to sleep on my back, and it gives you that hug feeling. So it helps you feel protected as you lay there, quote unquote, exposed at night. You said it also helps breathe out some of the heat.
It can. I think the materials and the weighted blankets just have a lower R value as far as being able to, as an insulation over top of you versus some of the really, like if you like a heavy feel on top of you for that hug to help you fall asleep. And some of that is just habits and personality of like, oh, I want to feel like there's a heavy blanket on me. But then when you put the heavy blanket on and all that insulation, then you're too hot. So I think it's a great alternative to get that huggy, warm, snuggly feeling without so many blankets on top of you that are insulating that heat.
Very interesting. Now let's talk about the mattress that you sleep on for a minute. And personally, I use the memory foam, and I got it a few years ago because I thought it would contour to the shape of my body, and therefore it'd be a better experience as I'm sleeping at night. I do notice that it does tend to get a little bit hot, and especially towards the second half of the night, it starts to radiate some of that heat, which would wake me up. Do you have a recommendation on what mattresses people should be using so that heat isn't coming back to bite them?
Yeah, and part of that is managing that temperature thing. Natural materials tend to be better, but I think that, this is sort of exposing my pet peeve of the mattress industry. I think they're selling fancy couches that we sleep on. It is a bit of a mess when you walk into a mattress store or you look online. How do you tell how many inches it should be, or what kind of foam it should be, or what that best comfort feel is going to be? And I don't think they do a good job of matching what your needs are from comfort to what kind of sleep experience you're going to have. So I think it's a little bit difficult. There is that firmness versus soft. A lot of it's just thinking about what my comfort is, and then making sure if you do sleep hot, probably using an alternative to that memory foam is a good idea.
Does the using one of your products, the Uller or the Chili Pad, also help you save air conditioning costs?
It definitely can. I mean, obviously someone has to adjust the thermostat up in order for that to happen. It runs on about 140 watts of power for the Ullers, for example. So it's a little more than a light bulb. So running that and really maintaining the temperature underneath you instead of the whole house temperature, it allows you to be able to adjust that thermostat up. Depending on what state you live in, that can be significant savings. In Arizona, Texas, those really hot places, their air conditioning is never going to really get to 68 very effectively, or if it does, it's very expensive. So this is a way to still get cool enough to get that great sleep without spending the big bucks on the whole house air conditioning.
Yeah, that makes sense. It would be if you could have a cooler underneath you as opposed to cooling the whole house to get that temperature differential or the cooling effect. That makes a lot of sense. Now, is it one unit or one of the chili pad or one Uller per user to maintain that temperature?
It is. So we've sort of geared it that way. When we look at human thermal modeling, and that is talking about that cave in there, we really match how much wattage a human can produce in the night on heat to the unit. So a person on average, and obviously this depends on age and gender, BMI, all sorts of factors, but in general, it's going to be between 60 to 120 watts of basically heat energy that comes off a person. So we've really matched that, and that's where that 140 watts comes in to manage that temperature output from them.
I see. A lot of people use devices to measure their sleep, and I myself have an Oura ring, and I would venture to say probably you have one as well.
I do. We're big fans of Oura.
Yeah, so am I. With the new Uller device, is your thought that are you integrating with some of these other third-party sleep APIs that exist?
Yes, that's definitely the plan. It's not there currently. That should roll out in early next year. That's definitely the plan. We want to be very friendly with all of those devices. Some of them are more accurate than others. I do have a bias towards Oura. We're using Oura in partnership in our research and clinical trials. They do an exceptional job at it, but I think being able to connect and track sleep and close that loop is really important. So if you're doing anything to improve your sleep, that you journal it or document it or keep track of it, because that's how you can measure change. That's how you know what's working for you.
You also have a companion app on the phone, don't you?
Yes, for Uller we do. It does not for chili, and our chili pad. We've kept it that way because there are some people that don't enjoy having an app to manage, or they don't want their phone. The app doesn't require that you have the phone next to your bed. Some people for EMFs don't want to have that interaction at all. So the chili pad has a remote, but Uller runs on an app.
Great. Well, I definitely recommend the device highly, especially if you're having problems waking up when you're too warm or too cold, your temperature isn't regulated when you're sleeping. So if you're listening and you've had that problem, I think you should go get the device. Let me ask you a different question. Temperature regulation is obviously a key component of getting a deep sleep. What are some other factors that we can use that are easy wins to increase the amount of deep sleep that we get?
Yeah, so obviously, as you said, temperature is a good bias. The other thing that prevents us from going into that deep sleep, and this is what we're discovering in some of the trials with veterans, is if you have any of the mental health issues from just mild depression to PTSD, they all have sleep symptoms that are happening. So if you're highly stressed, if you have other issues going on, those are very likely to be a problem. So, I really am a big advocate of meditation, journaling, de-stressing, making your life as simple as possible, especially in that last hour before you go to sleep, so that you can let your mind unwind and do what it's supposed to do for sleep.
Tara, how do we live a long and healthy life?
So I really feel like sleep is that amplifier for whatever we do. So if we get poor sleep, it's going to amplify whatever health issues we have. But if we can have great sleep, it also amplifies good health for the long term. And study after study is coming out that if we can sleep and have great deep sleep throughout our lives, that recovery, that health is going to, and that quality of life is going to continue way longer than someone that's not sleeping.
Now that you've launched a couple of devices in the sleep industry, what are you focusing your time on? What's the next thing?
So we're really excited that next year we'll be launching a sleep coaching app and really getting into the software space. A lot of the questions that you just asked of how we can help people sleep better no matter where they are and help manage that stress level and close that feedback loop are really important part of that future health and sleep connection.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. If you can tie all that and make it a closed loop system, A lot of people will sign up for that for sure. How can our audience find you online and buy one of your devices?
We're at chilitechnology.com. Both of the devices are listed there. We have footprints in all the social media outlets as well, which will direct you there. Just Google ChiliPad.
Okay. I'll make sure to add the links that you just mentioned to the show notes of this episode, which can be found at antiaginghacks.net/sleepcool. Tara, thank you for coming on the show. Again, I learned a lot, and I hope the audience members do as well.
Great. It was great to be here. Anytime.
You can find all the information we discussed in this episode and links to studies in the show notes at antiaginghacks.net. To make sure you get notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at antiaginghacks and on Facebook at facebook.com/antiaginghacks. And now for the disclaimers. This podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. Please seek the advice of your health professional for any health or medical conditions.